Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are diving into an absolutely mind-bending journey, one that connects modern quantum physics, ancient theology, and the very limits of human thought. We're going to explore the mechanics of eternity and look at how both brilliant physicists and ancient theologians have tried to map out the actual shape of time itself. So let's kick things off with a pretty profound mystery. What exactly was God doing before creation? Now, it sounds like a totally fair question, right? But as we analyze the source material, we find out it's actually fundamentally malformed. It instantly pulls us into a paradox. Think about it. If time itself is something that was created, well, there's no earlier moment to have been doing anything in. Creation isn't just a tick on the clock. It is literally the very edge of the clock itself. And that sets up the fascinating no-edge concepts we're about to explore. Part 1. The shape of time, the ancient mirror. So how in the world do we even begin to visualize a universe without a before? Let's look at how a modern mathematical trick in physics surprisingly mirrors a 1600-year-old theological concept. Okay, to solve some truly brutal quantum calculations, the kind that just make your brain hurt, physicists use a neat little trick called Wick rotation. It's essentially a mathematical hack where you swap out real time for imaginary time. And what's wild is that it works perfectly to make the math actually solvable, which is a huge relief when you're dealing with quantum mechanics. Stephen Hawking actually took this geometry very seriously, arguing that the universe has no temporal edge. So picture a globe. Asking what happened before the Big Bang is exactly like asking what is further north than the North Pole. There's just no seam there to even ask about. The shape is completely smooth. Now, here's where it gets wild. The historical parallel is just amazing. Hawking used this exact no-edge geometry to argue that, hey, we don't need a creator to start the universe. But 1600 years earlier, without any modern physics whatsoever, St. Augustine built the identical sheep. The philosopher Boethius later described this as God holding all of life at once, in a single eternal present. So they use this exact same no-edge, no-before shape to argue for a creator, one entirely outside the system that's generating it. So the absolute crucial takeaway here. The geometric shape of time is totally neutral. It's completely neutral. That identical mathematical model points to two completely opposite conclusions depending entirely on who's looking at it. It's your underlying belief, whether you assume blind mathematical necessity or an external divine will, that actually decides what this shape means. Part 2, where the model strains, testing eternity. So what happens when we take this ancient Augustinian model of a timeless eternity and apply it to the source texts? Let's stress test this picture and see exactly where it bends. Honestly, the timeless model mostly holds up incredibly well. It beautifully supports the incarnation. You have orthodox tools, like the Extra Calvinisticum, that explain how God's divine nature is never limited or exhausted by taking on human form. The divine remains infinitely vast even while stepping into our world. It also works perfectly for prophecy, viewing it just like timeless reporting. But where this single now picture pulls incredibly hard is against stories of dynamic interaction. When God relents regarding Nineveh, or responds to Moses interceding at Sinai, that strict timeless model really strains against how the text naturally reads. Scholars often reconcile these strains by pointing out that differing views, whether you hold a Boethian view of eternity or a reformed view of divine decree, are really just different dialects of the exact same orthodoxy. They're all grappling with the same mystery. And hey, speaking of fine-tuning our theological frameworks, here's a surprising historical fact from the source text. Accuracy matters in the timeline too. The crucifixion actually occurred on a Friday, tied to Preparation Day, not on a Tuesday as some alternative theories suggest. The historical details matter just as much as the broad strokes. Let's look at 1 Samuel 15, because it's a perfect example of this strain. In a single chapter, the text says God regretted making Saul king. And then, literally in the same breath, it declares that the glory of Israel will not lie or have regret because he is not a man. This direct paradox is amazing because it proves how the text acts as an internal guardrail. It holds two opposing truths, perfectly balanced, right there, without needing us to import complex systematic theology just to make it work. Part 3, the language barrier, words for eternity. Which brings us to a really fascinating question. Does the text actually give us the mechanical workings of time, or are we just building our own human inferences on top of it? Let's do some linguistic archaeology and find out. Scripture definitely gives us massive, load-bearing material. We get clear, undeniable concepts of eternality, immutability, and pre-creation existence. But what it deliberately does not give us is the mechanical how-to. Bible-believing theologians respectfully debate whether eternity means strict static timelessness or just an unending timeline. And here's the catch. They are using the exact same verses to argue both sides. That is our tell. It shows us that we've crossed the line from clear revelation into human inference. And honestly, if we dig into the original languages, they really don't rescue our modern assumptions either. Take the Hebrew word olam. It's often translated as everlasting, but it actually comes from a root meaning concealed, kind of like a vanishing point on the horizon. It describes the absolute limits of human perception, not making a technical, philosophical claim. Even the famous Ehyeh, I am, is grammatically ambiguous. It could be I am or I will be. In fact, John 8:58 is one of our only strict linguistic anchors, where the Greek beautifully contrasts Jesus' static is against Abraham's came to be. Part 4. A deliberate mystery. Category mismatch. So, surrounded by all this duration language that doesn't quite do the technical heavy lifting we thought it did, we really need to zoom out. Why do these concepts feel so impossibly hard for the human brain to fully lock onto? I really want to encourage you here for a second. If your brain is having a tough time picturing a universe without a before, well, that's not a flaw in your thinking. You are using a mind built to run in a sequence to try and picture something with absolutely no sequence. Our very language is fundamentally time-shaped. It is literally impossible to form a sentence trying to describe eternity without accidentally smuggling in a before or a then. That's just a limit on the container of human language, not evidence that the concept itself is empty. And honestly, that is exactly why the silence in the text regarding the strict, nitty-gritty mechanics of time makes total sense. This isn't God being coy with us. It is a true category mismatch. As 1 Corinthians notes, we are currently seeing through a glass darkly. Revelation was never aimed at satisfying our curiosity about quantum mechanics or temporal physics. Deuteronomy 29 actually draws a clear boundary. Secret things belong to God, while revealed things are given for us to obey. The silence on the mechanics of time? It's entirely purposeful. Which lands us on probably the most crucial takeaway from our explainer today. The text we have is completely sufficient, but it's not exhaustive. It openly admits that it isn't capturing everything. What it does provide is exactly what is needed for trust, for salvation, and for godly living. The underlying mechanics of God's relationship to time were never going to be handed to us like a science textbook, because trust and obedience were the actual target all along. So I want to leave you with a thought. The exact shape of time, it remains this incredibly profound mystery, stretching way past the limits of our time-shaped language. The real question isn't whether we can finally solve the math of eternity. The question is, are we willing to hold the hidden mechanics of the universe with an open hand, trusting the character of the one who holds it all at once? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.